Let's go, guys. Welcome back to the Sovereign Entrepreneur Podcast. Danny and my co-host Rob Greer in the building. Today we got a super exciting episode, I think. Something I'm novice really to. Rob is much more of an expert in. So we're going to be talking about AI and entrepreneurship and business today. So, we're going to start off. Rob's going to kind of give a little preamble about what we're talking about more in depth, and I'm going to start asking questions, and he's going to answer them, and hopefully we can add some pretty cool value to you guys today. So, Rob, what's up, dude?
What's up, man? Yeah, I mean, where I have an undergraduate, well, you're a novice in AI, but you're going to be graduating soon, and I have an undergrad, but we're going to have masters and PhDs on the podcast very soon, and I'm keen to look like an idiot on AI as well. That's how you learn. That's kind of the evolution of your knowledge on the topic, but I think it's a topic that's incredibly important today because my view is that every issue is downstream of AI and its progress over the next few years. It's going to be linked to geopolitics, other technological revolutions, biotech, biohacking that we've talked about in the last podcast.
Yeah.
And most pertinent for sovereign entrepreneur, I think it's AI within entrepreneurship. And how can you leverage it to its highest and best use, because it is leverage. It's the best form of leverage that we've ever had as entrepreneurs, because at the end of the day, a business is just a series of automations, and AI is a great way for automating processes, especially within the B2B context. But I hope I bring some kind of value to this discussion because, I have like a macro thesis on AI, but I'm preoccupying myself mostly with how can I leverage it in my personal life to improve my productivity, but then how can I leverage it at my DTC health supplement company, Avenir, and then to a greater extent at my B2B company called SovDoc. And so, I'd love to kind of talk a little bit about like my view of AI, where it is today and where I think it's going. And then we could go into a bunch of different areas and kind of the focal point of the discussion being AI within entrepreneurship. So AI, I first started getting interested in it in my early to mid-teens when I discovered the book, The Singularity is Near, by Ray Kurzweil. He's a futurologist, essentially a tech Nostradamus of today.
Right.
And he's the head of futurology at Google. And so, this guy is batting, 950 when it comes to AI predictions. In the 1990s, he was the guy that was saying, the singularity is going to happen by 2045, and he was getting laughed out of the room by experts within AI research and AI and science. And it's one of those things where it's so oxymoronic, but the experts within a field like AI that's moving at an exponential rather than a linear pace find it very difficult to project and extrapolate the medium and long-term future of it because they're just so caught in the weeds. And they're like, there's no way that, LLMs could produce something like ChatGPT. That's definitely in 2050. And then all of a sudden it comes in 2022. But I think in many ways, my view is that the history is kind of irrelevant. And that's a controversial statement, but in a world where there's artificial intelligence, artificial general intelligence, and certainly, artificial superintelligence, precedent in history becomes less relevant. And so I think a great place to start would be 2017, Google is doing research on transformers. Transformers are the key architecture and bedrock of large language models. I'll leave it at that. That's kind of the extent of my understanding. I could probably go a little deeper, but I'll let someone else do that in another podcast, maybe someone that was working at Google at the time.
Right.
But I think the big moment where it's worth starting is 2022. November of 2022, ChatGPT 3.5 gets launched. That is the seminal moment in AI that's going to go down in the history books. But I heard a really interesting perspective recently on a podcast where the individual was saying that was almost the Fermi moment. So there's the Fermi paradox, which is like, why, if the universe is so large, how have we not discovered aliens? But he was also, a brilliant individual in many other domains. And he basically built a nuclear reactor underneath Chicago in 1942, and people were freaking out about it, not because of radiation, it was kind of a minuscule facility, but it was because what that represented in terms of what the next 3 to 5 years of technological progress was going to look like. You have that nuclear reactor in 1942, you could easily extrapolate that there was going to be an atomic bomb within 1945, and the greater context was obviously World War II.
Right.
And what if the Nazis get that? what if the Japanese get that? What if the Italians get that versus the democratic coalition that we were in during that period? And so I view 2022 as the Fermi moment today. It's like, GPT 3.5, GPT 4, it's very impressive in many ways. And, we could dive deep into that, but it's what does that represent in terms of that initial kernel of where we're going to go over the next 3 to 5 years and beyond. I think it's a good idea to be looking at things in like a monthly, yearly perspective at max 5 years, because it's very tough to think in exponentials and kind of understand where things are going beyond 2030
Right.
anyways. And so where are we at today? We're at GPT-4, imminently GPT 4.5, rumored to be meaningfully better, anywhere from like 2 to 5 times better than GPT-4, which in many ways is hard to fathom. But GPT 4.5, we're hoping has more agentic capabilities, so it's able to act autonomously on your behalf, whether that's you saying, hey, I'm out of X, Y, and Z product, and order that off Amazon for me, and then build in recurrence for the order so that I don't have to do this again. Booking flights, building itineraries, doing things on your behalf in a personal capacity, ordering Ubers for you, whatever. But then on the business side, I think it's far more impactful, especially if you have a business that you own most of the equity in and you're leveraging it across the business stack. And I'm happy to talk about that in across my 2 different companies. But where are we going over the next 6 months, the next 12 months? You have things that are 10 to 15 times better. That's going to revolutionize entrepreneurship. And I think people that are early to that trend are people that were buying Bitcoin in 2010. It's
Right.
people that were involved with the internet, the Mark Andreessens of the world in 1995. It's Bill Gates, right, who recognized, that an operating system was going to be fundamental to the personal computer, right? Don't presume to be Mark Andreessen or Bill Gates, but I think it's people that, the idea is like people that are getting in on that technological revolution at that period of time I think it's a pretty lucrative place to be. But I will pause there. That was a lot of thought diarrhea. But
Yeah.
would love to hear, any questions resulting from that, or, we could kind of take the conversation any direction that.
Dude, I think there's like endless questions. My first question, and just kind of like on a 30,000 foot view of it, is when you say, hey, AI is going to be like the next ChatGPT is going to be like 4 to 5 times better, and that's kind of like unfathomable to think about. What does that look like?
Yeah.
4 to 5 times better than what we have now. Like, what is it doing outside of like that? Okay, I'm automating, it's functioning on my behalf a little bit more.
Yeah.
Which you can also explain the difference between like that and like Siri or Alexa, when Alexa's like, oh, you have this supposed to be ordered, like, should I order it for you? And you're like, yes or no, right?
Yeah.
So explain what you are seeing as a 4 to 5x on what we currently have on ChatGPT 4 going into 4.5.
Yeah, and even just like looking at it from a first principle standpoint, like how is it 3 to 5xing year over year? It's computational power applied to the training of these models. So it's training it on the entire internet, but not only that, synthetically creating new data to train the models on, and throwing more computational power at it. It's the Microsoft OpenAI partnership of building a $1 trillion supercluster of GPUs by 2027. Those are the kinds of things that are going to produce AGI by 2027, 2028. AGI defined as you are Skyping with some individual in 2028. They're just as smart as you, if not smarter, and it happens to be an AI, and you can't even tell the difference.
Interesting.
It's equivalent to a remote employee. I think that's like the definition of AGI that I subscribe to the most. And then, the more speculative and crazy conversations around ASI, Elon Musk is saying by 2029, there's going to be a computer that exceeds the intelligence of all of humanity by 2029.
Yeah.
It's like crazy stuff happening.
Real quick, just to click on that. Do you agree with Musk in that? Do you think around that date there will be an AI that is smarter than the entire human population?
Yeah, I mean, the irony is that Ray Kurzweil is looking conservative relative to his projections in the 1990s that there was going to be a singularity by 2045. I mean, Elon is an incredible individual. He's a techno-optimist, as am I, as is Mark Andreessen, the David Sacks of the world. I think the brightest people in Silicon Valley are. But even if Elon is off by 5 years, even if he's off by 10 years, it's happening within our lifetimes.
Yeah.
And that's the main point of relevance for us. And I think operating under that reality really the only thing you could do, I mean, I have this conversation with friends all the time. It's like, okay, I do believe that's going to happen, but like, so what? Like, what do I do? How do I optimize the present moment for that? And I think it's just reminding yourself day after day that this is happening and doing everything you possibly can to leverage AI and be adaptable and kind of coexist with it. Because I think, most humans are going to have to do that. And so if we're doing it sooner, the better. I tend to agree with Elon. I think, I talked about this in the last podcast, but if you have something that's getting 10x better year over year between 2024 at GPT 4.5 and GPT 10 or whatever it is in 2029, 2030, it's a million times better.
Right.
Even if it's 100,000 times better, I think,
Right.
that's presumably a world where ASI exists, and it's kind of tough to forecast what happens beyond that point. But what was the kind of initial question you were asking me? Just to
Yeah.
rewind?
So what does it look like? What does it look like for ChatGPT 4 going into GPT 4.5?
Yes.
Like, what is the functionality that's happening that someone who's using ChatGPT 4 right now is now going to be able to utilize it for as like in the 4.5 model being 4 to 5 times better?
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna look back on LLMs as this like cute little innovation, just like we had like 32 megabyte hard drives,
Right.
in the 1980s, and we're like, this is revolutionary, and now
Right.
we have like terabytes on terabytes. I think that's what LLMs are. It just text to text. That's 2022 to 2024. Where we're at now is multimodality, and so touched on this in the last podcast, but like text to voice, picture to text. Text to video, and then increasingly, individuals like Elon training their own proprietary LLMs on the millions of miles of self-driving data that they've accumulated over the years, and then ultimately in Optimus robots, and that's what allows the AIs to be, have more generalized intelligence resembling that of what humans have.
Right.
And that makes them, that'll ultimately make them, economically equivalent to the average human, to the median human, as Sam Altman says. But yeah, so GPT 4.5, 5, whatever OpenAI arbitrarily decides to name it, it's not just agentic. I think people have an understanding of roughly what that means. It operates on your behalf, but what is the bedrock of being agentic? It's long-term memory and long-term planning and the ability to operate and take action on those long-term plans. So it's not going to be something where you say, hey, explain to me what nuclear fission versus fusion is. The LLM right now is just immediately generating thought and spitting output based off of that, but the next models are going to have reasoning capabilities. And so it's able to take that query and actually think about it and have 1,000 different permutations of the answer and then choose that optimal answer, whatever the best one is. And it's going to be capable, that chain of thought that resembles what humans go through. It's like we think for a little bit and then we speak. That's not what the models are doing right now, but that's what they're going to be doing. But then once you have that reasoning capability, you could then construct long-term plans where like right now it's like, okay, like create this essay for me for college student, whatever. And, it'll spit out something and you have to kind of go back and forth and iterate on it. And it's like not perfect, but it's somewhat robotic and it's a little bit human, but that's getting better. But it's going to be like, okay, the model is going to be capable of creating the outline itself and then choosing the optimal outline and then finding the raw material for the actual paper. So going to PubMed and reading a bunch of articles and using that as the basis for the writing. And then not only that, looping in another AI that's going to be the editor that's going to improve it. And then sending you 5 different variations of the essay. And that kind of is a good segue into long-term memory because it's going to send you 5 different versions and you're going to give a critique of those 5 different versions and you're going to say why you like one version versus the other. And what that allows the AI to do is start to form a basis of who is Danny and what is his writing style. You're going to be able to feed your email history into it, your text message history, your browsing history. I mean, privacy is rapidly heading towards extinction.
Right.
I mean, it already is there, right, with the NSA and stuff. That's a whole other conversation.
Big brother watching.
Yeah, but the reality is the more these things know you, they become Danny GPT. They become replica versions of you. And that's gonna transform everything, right? Like all of a sudden, like it could text friends on your behalf. It could write emails on your behalf. It could do things as if it were you. And it's going to be like you have a clone. You're going to be able to talk to yourself. It's going to be a much different world. But Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll pause there, but I think like that's kind of roughly where the next generation of models are going to be. It's going to be a capability expansion, but then it's going to be a raw intelligence expansion as well. And that's literally just like what the experts are saying is coming, but there's also these black swan, I think white swan features, right? Like where people don't really understand like what's going to happen when, these AIs, I mean, they're already increasing the productivity of scientists and AI researchers, but right now, like we kind of have like fresh high school graduate level intelligence. Let's say GPT-5 is college student level intelligence, and then GPT-6, GPT-7, you have a bunch of PhDs, right? That's as smart as any human at anything in like 2026, 2027. One, I mean, obviously that's going to have massive implications, that which we can forecast and that which we can't forecast. But on the topic of what we can't forecast, you have PhD researchers that are accelerating science and doing novel science by themselves because they're PhD level intelligence, but they also have the long-term planning and the long-term memory, and it could go out and kind of discover, new science. It's kind of tough to understand what happens beyond that point.
All right, so before we jump into how you think and how you're implementing AI into the business and how other entrepreneurs can implement AI into the business in order to be more successful and leverage the technology. When you were talking about kind of that like long-term thinking and long-term, that part of it, is that essentially the way you can have like immortality without actually having
you're dropping the atomic bomb right now.
Yeah, but to me, right, just being a novice, that's what it sounds like to me, is like you essentially have a clone or you have someone thinking and learning to be you, right, in a technology that will never go away.
I feel like I need some THC for this discussion, but I mean, look, I could get as wild as you want. Like my view is that, we're going to be putting Neuralinks chips in our brain by the early 2030s, if not sooner. And that's going to have Google residing within our brains. It's going to allow us to speak without actually having to speak, because going from thought to speech to your ear and back is pretty inefficient.
Right.
You just need to increase the bandwidth. So basically, like you could be having many thought conversations at the same time. It's a whole other topic. But basically, like an LLM is a series of neural synapses, right, in a bunch of different modes, and they're firing, and that kind of resembles what I think we're going to be going into, which is kind of a hive mind, where you have your Neuralink chip, I have my Neuralink chip, but it's all like different nodes within a broader hive mind.
Interesting.
But yeah, I think that's what enables digital immortality for sure. But I think it's entirely possible that we get to organic immortality, at some point over the next 20 to 30 years, because like what will enable us to slow the aging process and ultimately reverse it? It's a atomic level understanding of the body as well as the brain. And once you understand that completely, you're able to manipulate it.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then like digital immortality, it's a whole other thing. I mean, there's questions of consciousness. There's the Descartes mind-body problem. It's like if I copy my brain on the atomic level and put that into an Elon Optimus robot that looks exactly like me, like it's a Westworld scenario.
Right.
Is that the same person, right?
Right.
It's some pretty heavy existential questions that come to the surface.
It's so crazy, and it's cool that we've had like movie shows that essentially like almost showcase that, right? In a way, there's another Netflix series where the soul is like this disc, and you can insert it into, I'll have to think of like what the name of that is.
There should be a white mirror, man. Like there's so much like techno pessimism. There should be a white mirror. We should do that.
Yeah, totally.
Because I think like there is a techno optimist perspective that's getting swept under the rug. It's just this techno pessimism that the media loves to fixate on. But I mean, even Elon, he's like, there's an 80-20 here. It's like it's an 80% chance of utopia, where it's not universal basic income, it's universal high income. Every single person has everything they could possibly need, and it's post-scarcity and abundance. Like, what does that actually mean? It means AI is deflationary. So, and like that'll be a topic for us to discuss, and that's AI within entrepreneurship. But like, human labor is the biggest cost of most services and most products. So if you strip that out of the equation, the costs go down, the margins go up, but ultimately AI is going to reduce barriers to entry, and so there's going to be more competition, and so the cost of goods and services is going to trend towards zero. And in that world, you could live like a king for a few $1,000s a month,
Right.
You know, the government's going to be able to provide that to people. We set a precedent with the helicopter money of COVID,
Right.
and we're going to be able to fund that helicopter money to the masses with the productivity and economic revolution and the gains that come of that because of AI.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, that's like kind of an entirely other topic of conversation. But
Yeah.
you know, the utopian scenario, I think, is the most likely. Elon believes it's the most likely, but that 20% is what we should be fixated on, right?
Yeah.
We need to take steps now, decisive, active steps towards reducing the probability that there's a dystopian outcome. And
Right.
so, you know, there's obviously the authoritarians that are going to be misusing AI, and there's going to be a geopolitical battle between the United States and China, a la, you know, World War II with the fascists and the democracies.
Right.
But Elon is primarily fixated on like super intelligence as a separate entity, and how do we alignment within
Right.
AI is like, how do we align the incentives and the actions of a super intelligent being with that of humanity? It's like a bunch of ants trying to control humans. That's
Right.
what it's going to be like. And so what is the best way to do that? It's to marry ourselves with the AI.
Right.
It's the marriage of AI and humans. That's transhumanism. That's a
Right.
whole other conversation. But I think that's inevitably where we're going, right? Like technology is getting closer and closer to us. It starts with the TV, and then we have the phone in our pocket,
Right.
and it's an extension of who we are. I mean, the argument can be made that we're already cyborgs and robots, right? Because
Right.
we have this thing in our pocket that holds the answers to the universe. This would be something that would be so profoundly astonishing
Right.
to someone in the early 20th century, and I think like that delta in technology is going to be like 5 years from now, things
Right.
that we can't even fathom.
Right.
And
Because like you said, it's like an exponential ramp, right? So it's like what used to maybe take 20 years now takes 20 days to increase, right? So yeah, it's going to be crazy. All right, so from there, let's go into the topic that everyone really wants to know about, is how to utilize AI in business as an entrepreneur, right?
Yeah.
So let's start with, how are you utilizing it? You can go into the personal side also, but mainly the business side. Like, how are you and how have you been, and maybe explain like the journey from day one on implementing AI in your business to like how far you've come using it now and all the different functionalities that it's, you know, doing for you.
So I think like AI within entrepreneurship, it's good to start with the why and then the how. So the why is what is the importance of using AI, and the how is like how you actually do it. And so I think the importance hopefully is obvious for most at this point, but from a first principles perspective, I think it's good to start with Naval Ravikant. You know, how do you get wealthy? It's using your unique specialized knowledge where you're a one of one, where you do not have competition, where you have great barriers to entry, and taking that knowledge and marrying it with a good opportunity within the economy that you see, and then figuring out a way to automate it and repeat it such that you could do it at scale. If you are solving people's problems, if you are adding value for people, that value will return to you in the form of wealth accumulation. And so like, I think that's a good place to start. And so how do you do something at scale? How do you work smart and not hard? How do you get something that operates, a business that operates without you being injected within the day-to-day operations? So you are increasingly paid to think rather than actually do something and sit in front of a computer, where you're just hopping on the phone, you know, day after day with different clients and closing them. You're talking to your key lieutenants within the organization, and you think, you speak, and then things get done within the organization. That's kind of the ultimate goal. And like, I'm certainly not there yet, but that's absolutely where I want to be, because in that kind of world, in my own little micro world, that allows me to have several businesses generating income that is significant and largely passive. And that allows me to have the freedom to do what I want, to travel, to, you know, spend time with my closest friends, to have conversations like these. It's, you know, I think that it's that's the good life, right? They were talking about last time. But that's the why. The how is use AI as much as you possibly can, right? If you're trying, any kind of skill and knowledge acquisition comes from just throwing yourself into it. I think for a lot of people, it's just like taking that first step. Like, AI is this intimidating and daunting thing, but it doesn't have to. Just go in the ChatGPT. I would recommend going in the Claude 3.5 from Anthropic. I think it's the better model, at least at this period of time. and just using it. I think like the best way to force yourself to use it is like if something requires more than a couple minutes of your thought, any cognitively intensive task, you should be outsourcing your thinking in some ways and working hand in hand with the AI to help it accelerate your thoughts. So, I mean, just like even conversation topics, preparing for this conversation, it's like, hey, this is where I want to take this conversation, but like, what am I not considering? How can I drive a point home in a way that's going to be most digestible for people, and it's going to be most impactful and hopefully most viral, because we're trying to grow this platform, right?
Right.
And it could help you do that. And so just like kind of thrusting yourself into using it, I think is a great first step. And it's one of those things where we're still discovering the capabilities of these LLMs, like collectively, like even experts, right? And so there are things that you're limited only by your own creativity. Like you start going into this LLM and you go down a rabbit hole. It's great for education. It's great for creating scripts for ads. It's great for writing essays. And there are various other use cases that I'm happy to dive into. But perhaps that's a good place for us to go. So we've talked about the why, we've talked about the how, and then let's talk about the actual practical steps to implementing it. Not as much in the personal life, more in the business, but there is a bit of a linkage there because,
Totally.
I mean, my life is business at this point, right?
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah.
But I'll start with Avenir, my DTC, direct-to-consumer health supplement company, where, I mean, we're using it, but it's a physical product company, so you're kind of limited. But I think the far more interesting angle is services, productized services, where, I mean, AI, I think, is going to be massive in that sector. And frankly, I think a far more reliable place to accumulate wealth over the next few years. But specifically on Avenir, I co-founded that with two physician influencers. They've been great partners. They've grown in and of themselves, and it's been a very virtuous cycle in a pretty tough market. It's capital intensive. You have to pre-buy these supplements in bulk. The cash conversion cycle is not super great, meaning, I buy the inventory, I sell it, I get that cash from Amazon in 2 weeks. It's relatively inefficient. It's also saturated and it's competitive. I think our unique differentiator and unique advantage is having the star power of these two doctor influencers. It adds a layer of credibility and legitimacy that is pretty tough to get within health supplements. You have doctors saying this ingredient does X, Y, and Z because there's been extensive research in the specific ingredient. It's powerful, right? And I think education is a precondition for someone actually moving the needle, actually pulling the trigger on a purchase on Amazon or Shopify for one of our products, for example. How are we using it? It's mostly within ads. And so our entire ads are AI generated, and I think that's what's allowing us to drive outsized performance in 2024, where we have an election coming up, and Trump and Biden, among many other people, are spending a ton of money on Facebook ads and on TikTok ads. And so when there's demand for Facebook advertising, for TikTok advertising, that raises the cost of advertising, the cost per eyeball, the cost per impression. And so I think we're doing very good, all things considered, and that's because of the AI ads. So this is kind of proprietary, but like I'll share it anyway, just like Hormozy does with his methods at his companies. But like we're using it to write the scripts. So we have custom GPTs on ChatGPT that are trained on every single ad that we've written over the course of the last 2 years, hundreds at this point. It's trained and fine-tuned with that context on Avenir. These are our products. These are the angles that work. This is what has driven the most virality and the best performance. And we're just constantly A/B testing. So like ad A works. Let's isolate one variable and test a different hook, or let's test a girl versus a guy voice and things of that nature. Because you have to continuously A/B test, and that's what allows you to succeed over the long term within Facebook ads, for example. So using the AI to generate the script, that is like the least sophisticated part of it. Then it's using a platform called 11 Labs, which is text to voice. And so you're able to take that AI generated script and actually use it to generate a voice. I mean, it's already at the point, you've heard this, where you could upload 10 minutes of your voice reading an article, and it'll generate your voice. That's 99% indistinguishable with the tonality, with the pauses, with the ums, with the likes. And you could use that to generate an audiobook in 5 minutes. It's crazy, right? But specifically for the ads, that's where the voice comes from. But then we have human-generated B-roll. B-roll being like someone taking like one of my products with a glass of water while they're outside at their pool, like that kind of user-generated content, UGC. But then also adding into the equation AI-generated content. So Midjourney, Stability AI, the big text-to-image players, taking those images, enhancing them with tools like Leonardo, so basically converting an image into a really like short 2 to 3 second animation that you're adding into the mix with the human generated B-roll and putting that into one ad with a really strong hook. And you know, it's been producing good outcomes. What is a good outcome within DTC health supplements? It's reducing the cost per acquisition. So at the end of the day, like success in business is lifetime value, the ratio of lifetime value to customer acquisition cost. So lifetime value defined as the aggregate gross profit of an average customer over the entire life cycle of that average customer relative to the customer acquisition cost. So the whole idea is reduce the CPA, the cost per acquisition, and increase the LTV. You do that across any business, you're gonna create a successful outcome.
Right.
So that's Avenir. Do you want to double click on anything there, or do you want me to dive into SovDoc?
No, you can dive into SovDoc. I think you covered on Avenir really how you're using it on more because it's a physical product. And like you said, actually we can double click on this for a minute. So you mentioned how you think the real wealth and longevity in a business is going to come from not a physical product, but a service product delivered in a digital format.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So why don't you just elaborate on that?
Well, productized service, right? It's you have a service that you're offering some customer and you templatize it and you standardize it, you productize it, and then you do that at scale. And so it requires a little bit of an upfront investment to build the automations and the SOPs, the standard operating procedures and the processes. But also, like in our case with SovDoc, the Excel models, the financial models that we're using to unlock value for these doctor practices. And I'm happy to talk a little bit about SovDoc and kind of show my company because maybe there's some MDs listening.
Shameless plug.
Yeah,
shameless plug.
Dude. Yeah. I mean, we're both pretty shameless.
Yeah.
If that's not already
evident. Love it.
If it's not already evident to people.
Love it.
Yeah, productized service. So like using AI to productize what service you're offering, and it allows you to do it at scale. So it's like one of those things where like 3 years ago, if I started this company, maybe I'm able to service 50 to 100 customers, but with AI in the next 3 years, maybe I'm able to serve 1,000 customers. And if the average customer is paying me $10,000 a month, that creates an 8-figure business. And you know, that's absolutely what I'm targeting and beyond. And I'm happy to kind of elaborate on how I intend to get there.
Before you go on, so with a physical product, you essentially are unable to do that regardless if you have AI. That scalability like doesn't exist, right? Because it's like a different model, right?
Yeah, I think it's tougher with physical products. I mean, if you get it right, it could be very profitable.
Right.
But I think, you know, AI is the commoditization of intelligence, and what does that create? It creates the commoditization of everything. And so I think physical products, maybe those get commoditized sooner, maybe services get commoditized sooner. I think products maybe have a greater barrier to entry because you just have that brand value. It's like Red Bull, I mean the Celsiuses that we're drinking right now, like I think that's tougher to disrupt than perhaps another productized service. It's debatable. I'd love to have that debate with someone. But you know, at the same time, I do think it's tougher to scale with that kind of thing. And there's more competition. Whereas if you're offering a really unique productized service that no one else is offering, I think that could create like pretty compelling wealth outcomes.
Yeah. Even if I feel like too, even if you're offering something the same, right? There's obviously saturated niches in the productized service arena, right?
Right.
But really, I think it's a lot easier to differentiate because you differentiate the value based on what you're bringing to the table versus some physical product where you're like, well, I have XYZ ingredients and blah, 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 and you know, all these things where it's just like, if someone likes your personality on the camera more than the other guy, they're going to work with you instead, right? Because it's, you know, it's almost like I'm utilizing AI more, but at the end of the day, it's still like the humanity behind the business, right? It's like everything's on you, but you get to use AI to scale in a much greater rate than like you can on a physical
Yeah, and
product
that's why we're doing Sovereign Entrepreneur. That's why I'm doing a SovDoc podcast. Like the whole idea is establishing credibility.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you want to decouple yourself as the key man of the business as well. Like it should
Totally.
be able to operate in the absence of you, because that's what creates, you know, enterprise value and
Right.
by extension equity value when, you know, acquire, whether it's a strategic or a
Right.
private equity firm is looking to acquire SovDoc in 5 years, right?
Right.
If it's relying on me, they're going to give me a lower multiple. There's going to be a value for this business, obviously.
Right.
But if it's not relying on me, if it operates independent of me, then it's going to get a much higher valuation.
Right.
So that's kind of the goal for sure. And
Right.
I'm kind of, having gone through the creation of one business and prior to that in private equity, understood the commonalities of what created successful businesses. I think, you know, I'm pretty optimistic for what I'm going to be able to do with SovDoc, and doing that from day one. You know, AI as a fundamental ingredient in the processes of SovDoc from day one. Mm-hmm. I think that's going to allow us to be a much more nimble and productive organization versus a larger competitor that's trying to convert their systems from human heavy to human plus AI.
Right.
And so if I'm one of my competitors, I think, you know, watch out.
Yeah, definitely. Love that. When you were in private equity and you learned kind of these commonalities behind successful businesses, when you watch these guys go exit, what was the major commonality? Was it the SOPs that were in place?
Well, these are just much different businesses, right? Like these are like home health companies, hospice health, death care, software companies. I think it does boil down to SOPs and automations.
Right.
Like even with a hospice care company, there are automations in place.
Right.
And I mean, with private equity, the playbook is a lot different, where it's like organic growth, like you're growing the platform in an organic fashion, and then inorganically, you're finding like really good deals on tuck-in acquisitions that you're getting for a song. Where they kind of have low-hanging fruit opportunities to improve the value. You bolt it onto your platform.
Right.
There's cost synergies there, so you eliminate any of the duplicative employee labor, get everything onto one software system, so you kind of wring out all the value there. But then it's like you buy the initial platform for 10 times EBITDA, you buy the tuck-ins for 6 times EBITDA, and then you sell the aggregate platform at 14 times EBITDA.
Right.
And along the way, you've increased EBITDA. I mean, that's how you get to 3 to 5x equity multiple outcomes on these individual investments over a 3 to 5 year period. It's why private equity is so lucrative.
Right.
And so why so many, you know, limited partners are chasing exposure to it.
Right. Yeah, like you said, it's like when you have the foundation of those SOPs and you can roll something into it. I mean, how do you increase profit margin? Like the low-hanging fruit is making your systems and processes more efficient.
So you could like increase revenue, you could decrease expenses.
Right.
That's how you increase EBITDA.
Yeah, that's.
I mean,
you
there's
pull
all
the
other
lever,
like financial, you know, financial engineering, like this is a one-time, non-recurring, and you kind of get into that debate with the buyers and the bankers and stuff on both sides. But it's really like if I could increase revenue and keep profit margins static, that increases EBITDA. But ideally, I could increase revenue and decrease expenses, so the net EBITDA is kind of multiplied by a factor of 2. And EBITDA, you get a multiple of that. That EBITDA, LTM EBITDA, last 12 months EBITDA times your multiple is the enterprise value. So if you have a $10 million EBITDA company and it trades for 10 times, it's a $100 million business. If you have $25 million of debt, then it's $75 million to the equity holders. If you own half the company, you're $37.5 million richer.
Yeah, very interesting. All right, so why don't you go into basically like how you're using AI in, we've already talked about Avenir, right? The other business, SovDoc.
Yeah.
So how are you utilizing it in SovDoc today?
Yeah, let me explain briefly what SovDoc is.
Yeah,
so
go into
sovereign entrepreneur, right? The bedrock of that is sovereign individual. Power is going to the individual versus the nation state. We kind of talked about in the last podcast. Sovereign doctor, sovereign entrepreneur is an offshoot of that. And sovereign entrepreneur, I think it's pretty obvious. It's helping entrepreneurs take the red pill and plugging from the matrix. We should have a conversation about that at some point too. Sovereign doctor is, most doctors, I mean, this is going to be a broad generalization that may raise some eyebrows, but most doctors are deficient when it comes to business knowledge and finance knowledge and certainly private equity knowledge. There's also just a broader trend of, AI is going to impact doctor practice as well. I think in the next few years, the story is mostly going to be the back-end administrative burden. So the revenue cycle collection, the EHR, like doctors using it as a co-pilot for diagnosis, radiology, for example, like interpreting scans. That's going to be the story over the next couple of years. But what it's actually going to mean is that the same doctor is able to see 3 times as many patients and produce better patient outcomes at the same time over the next few years. So, this has broad positive, implications and externalities. Like physician shortage is a big issue right now. Healthcare providers, nurses, for example, my sister's a nurse, like there's a crazy demand for these individuals right now because we have this broader trend of, the aging of the United States population, the aging of Western nation populations, variety of reasons for that. But 10,000 people are turning 65 every day. You do the math on that. And so there's this huge demand for healthcare services, but there's not as many physicians. But the other way to think about it, the outside box way to think about it, is AI is going to increase the productivity of these physicians such that they're able to see more patients. So what about, the 20th century way of seeing a doctor is, not even the 20th century, it's like the 2010s way of seeing a doctor is, the doctor has their electronic health record open in front of their computer, they're meeting with a patient, and the patient is saying, I have XYZ issue wrong with me, and the doctor is putting that into the EHR that's individualized to the patient. And they're going back and forth, and they're multitasking. You were just mentioning this multitasking is impossible, right? People think they could do it, but they can't, including physicians. But now there's things like Scribe, for example, which is an EHR add-on software tool. EHRs are kind of adding this as add-ons, but basically what it allows it to do is the AI is listening to the patient encounter, so the doctor could stand face-to-face with you and have this conversation in the present moment, and in the background, the EHR is transcribing that and updating the EHR. So that reduces like 2 hours a day of administrative bullshit that the doctor doesn't have to do anymore. What can they do during that period of time? More patient care. And so that allows the physician to see more patients on average. And that's going to explode over time. But yeah, there's this broader opportunity within AI, the digitization of the doctor practice. That was a little bit of a tangent, but there are these opportunities, these incredible opportunities for doctors to AI enable themselves and AI enable their practices, and also to explore private equity. I think we're going to have a change of administration in a few months, and it's going to be a much more laissez-faire economic environment, and private equity thrives within that environment. And so what does that mean? It means a lot of different things for the economy, but it also, and wealth inequality, and companies staying private for longer versus going public, that whole thing. But it also means that private equity is going to play an increasingly dominant role within the healthcare ecosystem, and as also within the doctor practice setting. It's already pretty dominant. It's going to become more. More physicians are going to be employed by private equity in 4 years, in 2030, than they are now. And so fluency in private equity has never been as important for the average doctor. They should be teaching courses on finance and accounting and private equity in medical school. And so I'm having conversations with these doctors, and they don't understand any of this stuff. Like, they don't know what a P&L is. Like, they don't know what EBITDA is. And EBITDA is like one of the 2 core components of the value equation, the equity value of their practice. Like, most doctors are focusing on, like, what is my taxable net income? What is my annual cash flow that I'm going to use to, buy my Ferrari or, my 5,000 square foot McMansion? But the reality is most of their net worth is in the value of their practice that they've spent decades building. And so what is SovDoc doing? It's applying the frameworks of value creation from my healthcare private equity days and applying it to the private doctor practice, which empowers the sovereign doctor to take advantage of these opportunities themselves, as opposed to the private equity firm coming in, getting a crazy deal, which, what does private equity firm getting a crazy deal mean? It means the doctor's leaving money on the table because their unsophistication is leading to lower valuation that they otherwise could get. So allowing the doctors to increase their EBITDA, which we can consistently do, and then also increasing the exit multiple that they're going to get. And so if we could add millions, if not tens of millions of equity value to these doctor practices, and we take 10% of that, the doctors are very happy, we're very happy, because we're doing it for 10, 100, hopefully 1,000 clients at scale, right? So right now, I mean, SovDoc is a relatively nascent business, and it's one that's synergistic with Avenir too, because we're meeting all these doctors, and then I'm telling them, planting the seed about Avenir, hey, maybe you could put this inside of your doctor practice. So they're going to be synergistic businesses, but right now we're focused on acquiring customers and lead gen. So lead generation, there's a top of funnel, middle of funnel, bottom of funnel. It's essentially like a reverse pyramid, if you kind of visualize that in your head. So you have the top of funnel, so those are the cold leads, and then you have the middle funnel, it's the people that are kind of pregnant with the concept of SovDoc, and you've had a conversation or two with them. And then the bottom of funnel is like people that are super hot and like ready to convert into clients. And so the more top of funnel, it's kind of a game of mathematics, right? It's like you add more doctors to the top of funnel, and it's going to produce more bottom of funnel client conversions. So what are we trying to do right now? It's building the number of top of funnel leads right now. And so that's where we're using AI, and that's where it's proving to be like pretty revolutionary right now. Like I genuinely think SovDoc is on the cutting edge of B2B lead gen right now in the United States. There are other companies that are doing this, but like I think we're doing it pretty well, like 99th percentile. And so like this is Hormozy, right? This is $100 million leads. Like that book is truly incredible. Like I think the best business book that I've ever read. $100 million leads. It's a great investment. And I read it a couple of years ago, but I didn't fully appreciate kind of the business alpha that was sitting within those pages. But when I was actually real time building a business like I am now, and I returned to that book, it's like this is truly incredible. And so the 4 ways to generate new leads are inbound content creation. So that's doing exactly what we're doing now, like putting content on all the different social channels at the same time. And we're using AI to do that too, because we're using AI to come up with the high level talking points for these scripts. We're using it to cut our podcast episode, our 60, 75-minute podcast episode into digestible bits that we're putting on our story, on our personal profiles, on SovDoc, on Sovereign Entrepreneur. And I mean, there's also the AI generated angle right now. Like most of our content is going to be us talking in interview setting like this, but there's also like, I've replicated my voice and I can articulate more of my thoughts at scale on a weekly basis using an AI generated voice of mine. And why should that have any lower value? That's something that I would come up with myself. It's trained on me. I'm just able to do more of it. And I think, the idea is just adding as much value as we possibly can. AI is increasing the quantity of content and the quality of content. That's inbound. And that's something that's like a gift that keeps on giving over the long term. It takes a little while to reach that critical mass and momentum. We're gonna have to do like 50 of these Sovereign Entrepreneur podcasts, but at some point Hormozy's gonna see this, right? At some point, like these guys are gonna see this, and hopefully, they're interested enough to get on our podcast. Like my goal with SovDoc is to have Hormozy invest in it, and I hope he hears this because that's my goal. In many ways, I think, for anyone that's familiar with Hormozy, he had Gym Launch. That was like his big business. Like he sold that to private equity for 40 whatever million dollars. Hormozy's whatever, 34, 35, and he's easily 9 figures. He's gonna be a billionaire in the next 5 years, mark my words. And I think his Gym Launch, there's analogously, I think in my case, SovDoc, which is almost Doctor Launch as well. And like I'm kind of building my business in the way that Hormozy scaled his, but adding some AI elements to it. And so my hope is that like I could even accelerate the path to getting to that scale, because we're just in a different world versus when Hormozy was doing Gym Launch like 3 to 5 years ago. So that's inbound. The second way to generate leads is media buying. And so what is media buying? It's buying eyeballs on Facebook. And so with B2B, it's a much more complex funnel. Funnel meaning we create a lead magnet. A lead magnet is an ebook or a white paper, some kind of valuable PE 101 for doctors, for example, ebook. Guess what? That text is entirely generated with AI. And then I pass it along to my team that are very talented with graphic design and things of that nature. They put it into this really professional thing, and you use it as a lead magnet, as bait for your Facebook ads. So it's like PE 101 for doctors or PE 101 for orthopedic or plastic surgeons. That is the face of the Facebook ad. You add a little bit of copywriting, and then the doctors click on that. And once they click on that, it redirects them to a website. That is a SovDoc website where it's download your free ebook. They put in their email. Guess what? You just captured that customer. That's something that it's like a follower on Instagram. You have that email list, and it's a gift that keeps on giving because you just hit them with the newsletter, with content, with notifications that just kind of staying on their mind on a weekly basis. It's like one of those things like marketing 101 where like you have to have 5 to 7 touch points before someone actually converts. And that's absolutely the case with something like SovDoc, where they're going to be paying, you know, 5 to 10 grand a month plus for our fractional CFO with P flavor services. And I mean, beyond that point, there's something called a video sales letter on that landing page that I was talking about. And so that's a second step. So they download their ebook. Hopefully they get some value from that. But then step 2 is watch this 10-minute video of me talking about how to create value at your practice. Like, how do you maximize practice value? You increase EBITDA, you increase exit multiple. And like actually dissecting that in 10 minutes, all in the spirit of like, this doctor, by the end of that, is like, okay, this guy clearly knows what he's doing. Like, he's 29 with a baby face, but he knows a thing or two about private equity. And by the end of that, the third step is book a call. And once you have that book call, you know, if I close 50% of the people that I'm hopping on the phone with, even 20% of people that I'm hopping on the phone with, that produces pretty good outcomes. My goal is just like have my calendar completely filled with like Beverly Hills lunches with plastic surgeons or calls with multi-specialty orthopedic platforms in North Carolina, for example.
Yeah.
That's media buying. The third thing is cold outbound. And this is where AI is playing a role for sure. And so what is cold outbound? That is, you know, cold email, cold DMs, cold LinkedIn connections, cold phone calls at scale. And so rewind 5 years, rewind 30 years ago, is a very manual process. Like, you have to come up with that email and you have to send it. And then it increasingly becomes more automated and more scalable. So like I don't have to go through the history of this, but like, where are we at today? Where are we going? AI enables mass personalization at scale. And so we could come up with a list of 50,000 surgeons in the United States that are our ideal customer archetype. And all you need is the names. The AI can scrape the internet now automatically for you, and it could go to your LinkedIn and it could see, okay, this is what the doctor was posting about. This is what the doctor likes. This is what the doctor's been following. This is the doctor's Instagram, and this is the doctor's website for his practice, his or her practice. And it fills that all within an Excel spreadsheet, all 50,000 names. Now you have a bunch of different columns for each of those 50,000 rows of names. And the magic is it can produce a 2 to 3 paragraph email that is personalized to each of those 50,000, and it can do it like that. And that is extremely powerful, right? Because it's just a numbers game again. You send out 50,000 emails, you know, half the people are like, fuck you, take me off your list.
Yeah.
So just to walk through like 2 examples of cold email that are top of mind, because I did this over the last like 5 days, for example. Like, one, let's take that 50,000 doctor list and actually boil that down to how that converts to customers in a funnel kind of mathematical formula. So 50,000, and then you get some kind of an open rate, which translates to, let's say, a 10% response rate. I mean, 10% is pretty high. Let's say it's a 5% response rate. So 50,000 emails, you get 2,500 responses. And let's say only 10% of those responses translate to an actual booked call. That's 250 calls, right? And like, if I could close 20% of those, that's 50 clients. 50 clients at 7,000 MRR, monthly recurring revenue, $7,000 in revenue coming in each month. I mean, whatever that is, 50 clients times 7,000 a month. It's 350K a month of MRR. It's like, you know, it's a pretty good outcome from a profitability, cash flow, and then most importantly, an equity value standpoint. So that's one example. The second example is I go to this conference in Chicago, Becker's Healthcare. It's an orthopedic, pain, spine, neuro, dental conference, one of the largest in the United States. Scott Becker is a lawyer at McGuire Woods. He founded the whole thing. He's an awesome guy. And it was great. 4 days, and I sponsored the booth for a few $1,000s. And what do I get as part of that booth? I have 1,500 names of attendees to that conference. And so, as I was mentioning earlier, I have the names in an Excel spreadsheet. I'm able to fill out all their contact information. I'm able to cold email them 2 to 3 times before the conference. And the response rate was incredibly high, because you open up with, hey, are you going to Becker's? All of them are going to Becker's. That's an attendee list.
Right.
And so, yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, SovDoc is more part of the collective consciousness of the meeting, more people aware of it. People are coming up to the booth and they're like, hey, did you reach out to me? And I was like, yeah, I reached out to you.
Yep.
It's my AI. Some of the people I told that was funny. Most of the people I didn't.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things where like you have more client conversions coming out of that, just because you have 10% of the attendees coming up to your booth, 150 conversations, how many of those conversations turn into SolveDoc clients? If I had 100,000 of monthly revenue to SolveDoc as a result of just that one conference, just those 4 days over the next 6 months, and I spent 5,000 for a booth, it's a pretty good return. And AI is at the root of that. The last one is affiliate. So affiliate is vendors, individuals with doctor networks. Everyone knows a fucking doctor, right? Everyone is a potential affiliate then, right? Like, doctors, you might make introductions, and I say, okay, my lifetime value at SolveDoc is, let's say it's arbitrarily 25,000 a gross profit. I mean, to properly define LTV, you need to have longitudinal data. You need to look back over the last couple of years and be like, this is the average customer, and this is their average, aggregate gross profit contribution. But let's say it's 25,000. I think it's gonna be north of that. Hormozy's LTV at gym launch, I think, was like 45,000. So, and I think we could eclipse that, but one step at a time. Let's say it's 25,000, and I want to maintain a 10-to-1 LTV to CAC, which is stupidly good. Again, Hormozy is at like 36-to-1, so he's got me beat there, but game on. And so that means that I could afford to spend $2,500 per client acquisition and still be happy that I'm getting a 10-to-1, LTV to CAC ROI. And so what do I do with affiliate? Well, one, CAC, that informs what I could pay for my cold email acquisitions, for all the other ways that I'm generating. And then you have all those 4 channels, you have a blended cost per acquisition, and you have a blended LTV, and you're like, okay, that's really the main metric I want to be focusing on. But when it comes to affiliate, it's really good to be able to define that $2,500 cost per acquisition, because then I can say, Danny, for every single doctor you introduce me to that turns into a client, I'll give you $2,500. And that's just an arbitrary figure. It could be 2,000, or maybe I find that the LTV is 50,000 and I'm able to pay my friends 5,000.
Right.
And then I just have this army of people that are introducing me to doctors, and it just leads on leads on leads. And that's, there's a little bit of AI in that equation. It's a little bit of tapping into my first order network, which, of doctors is pretty sizable, just coming from my healthcare PE and IB background. But it's the second and third order connections, right? It's like I speak to a doctor, and the doctor's like, I have 3 doctors you should speak to. And you kind of hit an exponential moment with the lead gen. And the way to reach out to those affiliates is the same way we're reaching out to clients. So we're cold emailing companies across the United States that are selling adjacent services and products into the same customer end market as we are, and saying, hey, one, I'll give you this $2,500, $3,000 commission, which, by the way, doesn't have any expenses associated with it, so it drops right down to the EBITDA. So they're happy about that. You put a 10x multiple on that, that's $22K of equity value. But then at the same time, it's like I could co-sell your services. My clients are your clients, and my success is your success. And you develop a relationship with these vendors, and ultimately you can start co-selling. So I have a buddy, Devin, hope you don't mind that I'm reaching out, telling people about this, but he's got an accounting firm. My buddy Kyle has an accounting firm. Guess who a lot of their customers are?
Yeah, the medical professional.
Doctors, right?
Yep.
And so they could plant the seed for SolveDoc, I could plant the seed for their companies. They could offer the accounting services, I offer the fractional CFO. It's kind of an assembly line, and it works out really nicely, and everyone benefits. And so that's kind of where the lead gen comes into play. I thought talking about organizational structure can be interesting. I could touch on that. And then at the end of the day, kind of the ROI. And how do you preserve the ROI? How do you increase it? And how do you kind of do value-based pricing based off the value you're creating for your clients? So organizational structure. Peter Diamandis, who's a really prominent longevity guy, transhumanist, and he's also very interested he's an authority on the intersection of AI and business. So I derive a lot of my knowledge and insights from that guy, among many other people. And he has this concept, he has this annual conference called Abundance 360, and the whole idea is business leaders go to this so that they could best equip their businesses to thrive in an AI era, to capitalize on the opportunities that comes from that era. And so he has this idea of an exponential organization, which he calls an EO. And I was just listening to a podcast recently, and the guy was incredibly impressive. I really should know his name. Maybe I'll look it up in a second. But he's got this organizational, he's taken his business from 0 to 300 million in the last 3 years of revenue.
Wow.
And by the way, that's at 20% EBITDA margins.
Unreal.
60 million of EBITDA in 3 years.
Crazy.
yeah, that man's going to be a billionaire, if not already. And how did he do that? He's delivering basically outsourced business functions for a variety of different companies at scale. And so the organizational structure specifically, he's got the top layer. He's got this is an actual pyramid. He's got the top layer partners who are equity partners in the organization. And so they have alignment of incentives with him because they own part of the company. Then underneath the partners, they have the specialists. So I guess that the partners, they're the generals. You have the specialists who are the lieutenants and the captains, and then you kind of have the agents who are the foot soldiers who are doing kind of the actual work. And so I am trying to model my organization at SovDoc based on that structure, not the boss bureaucratic dynamic that's going to be completely eviscerated by AI. It's you have the agents that are doing the work. And so for us, we have like the financial analysts, international financial analysts that are doing a lot of the model construction for the doctors and their practices. That flows up to the specialists that are doing quality control, and that flows up to the partners that are sprinkling on the AI insight, or not the AI insights, the private equity insights, the strategic value. So it's like, we're giving these doctors 99th percentile financial models akin to what they would get if they were owned by a private equity fund. But not only that, we're helping them make sense of the financials. So it's, this is where your operating expenses could use some reduction. This is where you could trim some fat. Or here's how you could digitally acquire patients, just like you digitally acquire customers, to increase your revenue. Because at the end of the day, like, your revenue is your price times volume, the price of your procedure on average times the number of procedures you're doing. And you could acquire patients, you could acquire procedures in the same fashion that I would acquire customers for my products at my health supplement company. And anyway, that's kind of the organizational structure, but AI is going to replace a lot of these things. Like the next 3 years, it's my financial analyst, just like the doctor could handle 3 times as many patients 3 years from now, my financial analysts are able to handle 3 times as many clients 3 years from now. And that just leads to a much more nimble, fast organization that's able to deliver more revenue per employee. I think that's going to be kind of the story over the next few years in business. I mean, you're already seeing this with like Facebook and Google, where like the revenue per employee is like 7 figures. It's incredible. The same thing is going to hold true here, and the revenue per employee is going to skyrocket, ultimately to a point where like there's one person organization, or there's an AI CEO that replaces me, so I'm just the chairman. That'd be pretty cool. That's a world where my EBITDA margins go from like 30 or 40% to like 80% or 90%. Yeah. And my revenue growth is triple digits. That leads to a pretty good equity outcome for me, and anyone that owns my company, a piece of my company. All
right, so kind of moving on to what I think is probably the most important piece of all 100%. Of this, right, is, so how are you adding value for the customer at scale with all of this?
It's a great question. I mean, like, at the end of the day, I mean, this feeds on what we were saying earlier, but the way you get rich and accumulate wealth is adding value for people at scale. And so, I mean, that's obviously top of mind for me at all times. The more value I can add collectively for the doctors, the sovereign doctors, the 1/3 of physicians in the United States that are not employed by health systems, the more value I could add for them, I will just take a piece of that value. And so like that's kind of like at its core, I mean, that kind of feeds into the LTV thing, the lifetime value as well. So the value I generate, I capture that in the form of lifetime value. And as long as that lifetime value is sufficiently greater than customer acquisition costs, it's going to lead to a good outcome. And so that's the why. I guess the how is, how can I increase the value of these doctor practices as much as I possibly can? And so I could use that, I could use AI to do that, but it's how can I increase their EBITDA? So I guess maybe just talk about exit multiple and then the EBITDA piece, because the EBITDA is kind of more of a multi-layered onion. Exit multiple is just how much is the private equity firm looking at your doctor practice as a viable platform? They look at it and they're like, okay, this is just like a buyer will walk into a house, right? And they look at it. I mean, this beautiful house here in the Palisades you have. Like, this is a beautiful house. Like, it is well kept. It has a good foundation. They care about the external. They care about the internal. You want your doctor practice to look like that, because the private equity firm is going to be like, man, this is great. This is a great first doctor practice, or maybe you've done 2 or 3. You have that repeatable framework that you've applied to more than one practice. So the private equity firm is looking at it and it's credibility. It's like, they've been able to do this ourselves. Imagine what they'll be able to do with our capital and our strategic expertise, because guess what? That private equity firm's done it 10 times. And you're not going to be an exception. And so like, how do you get that interior looking pretty good when it's a house or a doctor practice? It's the financial infrastructure and the digital infrastructure, and that's kind of what we're offering at SovDoc. The bread and butter of what we're offering is the financial infrastructure. So it's, the financial models. So like most of the doctors have like a 65-year-old baby boomer bookkeeper in place that's managing for taxable net income. We're taking that taxable net income and flowing it through our private equity models. What do they actually look like? I mean, probably going to bore some people here, maybe not, but it's like a 3 to 5 year backward looking on a monthly basis and 3 to 5 year forward looking on a monthly basis. And so the doctors have this qualitative vision of where they want to take their practice over the next 3 to 5 years. That's great, but let's articulate that vision via projections within an Excel spreadsheet. And that's what we're able to do. And so it's monthly, rolled up to quarterly, rolled up to annually, and you're refreshing that on a monthly basis. So it's like, how did we do in June of 2024 relative to June of 2023 and June of 2022? How do we drive that outperformance or underperformance? And how do we make sure that June of 2025 is way better than it is now? Micromanaging your financials on that basis, what gets measured gets managed. Peter Drucker, right? That cliche, it's so true. And so you're able to kind of identify historical patterns, historical trends, which allows you to kind of take advantage of the future and kind of seize that opportunity going forward. And where we come in is like, we help them micromanage their financials, but we also help them, once you understand, you could influence and manipulate. So it's like, okay, like these are the levers we need to pull, and that's going to allow us to increase our EBITDA. But that financial infrastructure, that's one piece. Then the second piece is operational KPIs. So it's, what are the operational heartbeats of your practice? Like whatever that is, number of procedures you're doing across various specialties. What is the pricing? What are the key KPIs, the key performance indicators that really indicate like how the practice is functioning? What is the efficiency of the practice? And like, let's measure that and let's improve them as well. And then the last thing is, we've defined what their last 12 months EBITDA is. And then we know, like, within plastic surgery, the range of multiples is between X and Y, because we have knowledge of the space and where other similar platforms and practices are trading. We could give them a rough sense of where their practice would trade at today, set that valuation baseline, and then let's figure out how we could improve that by 2 or 3x over the next 3 to 5 years. The delta, the difference between their equity value in year 3, in year 5, and where it is today, that difference is their value creation, and we take a piece of that.
Rob, that was super interesting to hear your take on value creation, right? For the
Glad you
doctor.
thought so.
Yeah, no, it's really good. Like my whole thing, especially in all this we're doing, right? Again, people learn more about my story. I've already been open with it, right? Being a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous is, the main goal in life is to be of service and add value to others, right? So it's really amazing. I think it all comes back to the piece of, how am I adding value to my customer, right? And the more value I add, the better it goes for me as well.
Who's your customer?
So that's a great question. So my customer is a variety of different people, right? Now, I specialize in mostly working with ultra high net worth individuals. Being a financial advisor, what I've learned throughout my career is the importance of financial planning, right? And understanding that it's not about how much you're making, it's about how much you're keeping over time, right? And how to really...
The preservation of wealth.
Yeah, not only preservation, but also growth of wealth, right? Because, it's very easy for people to, like you said, right? Like doctors are good at practicing medicine, right? They're not good at running a business, and they're not good at managing money.
Yeah, they're good at spending it.
Right, they're good at spending it, right? They have high expenditures, they live big lifestyles, but guess what? They went to medical school, some of them took on loads of debt in order to have that happen, and they did that knowing I'm going into a career with a very large opportunity for, again, wealth creation.
Playing
right?
good offense.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think, like you mentioned before, the infrastructure of kind of that ecosystem that you're able to deliver even further value and on the lead gen with your friends who own accounting firms, right? Again, I'm not a CPA, I'm not an accountant, so I don't know taxes and tax law and all the deductions and all these
By
things.
the way, you don't need to know that stuff
Right.
to thrive in business.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, I have a CPA as well, you know, but
Underneath you, like a CPA individual.
correct.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, exactly. So, but the other importance of the infrastructure also is having someone like myself in that team, right? Of where you're helping add more value to create more revenue, bottom line revenue for the business, an exit strategy, right? Where the doctor can capitalize on their decades of hard work without essentially winding a business down to zero when they want to retire, right? You have the accounting team going in, hey, we're helping you with taxes and increasing your revenue through deductions and all these things that they're experts on. But then having someone like myself on the team in order to help, okay, you're creating this wealth, you have this nice cash flow. How are you setting yourself up and your family for the future in order to essentially, when you are done, make this last forever, future generations, you know, those legacy conversations are my most favorite conversations is, okay, you've done this, how are you going to take this and benefit future generations?
Multiply the pie.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly, right? And have an impact, right? Kind of like how we were talking before on the kind of that like immortality with AI and the future of AI, right? It's like the financial side is another way to have immortality, right? If you build a building at a hospital and you have your name on it, right? Like that's there for as long as the hospital is
Yeah,
there,
like
right?
Milken, for example, right? Like
Another great
kind of just
example.
perpetuating your name.
Exactly, right? And where I'm from in Rochester, this guy, Tom Golisano, who founded Paychex, the payroll company,
Yeah,
right? Like half the buildings at all the hospitals has his name on it. The Wegman family, right? They own supermarkets, started in Rochester. They're huge philanthropists, right? And so that legacy, not only are you you're kind of immortalizing yourself in the surrounding community that you're doing that in, but also the amount of lives that you are benefiting or changing for the better because of those donations and facilities, right? So, and that's part of the conversation that I love to have with clients, right? And it's especially in your case when you're working with clients is even doing the pre-planning that a lot of people don't think about, right? It's like, okay, my goal is an exit strategy. In order to set yourself up to best receive a $30 or $50 million check is to plan for years in advance, right?
Right.
To get all the infrastructure to when that money comes in, it goes into the right entity, the right account, the right strategy, right? And then at that point, you don't have $50 million burning a hole in your pocket and then you're scrambling to figure out what you want to do. That helps with tax, right? All these things to have all that pre-planning and then to set up that strategy of, hey, this is going to support me and my family for the next 50 years, right? It's going to produce income for me to live off of or whatever. But then how do I grow what I got more in order to really leave a lasting impact, right? How do I 3x, 5x that check that came in, right?
And your cost, your investment, what you charge, whatever how many bips it is relative to their net worth, their assets under management, that's a drop in the bucket compared to how much value you're creating them just by kind of laying that foundational infrastructure.
Always.
Yeah.
Just like you, right? It's like there's only a cost in the absence of value, right? So,
Yes.
you know, that's like my favorite quote because it is true. And again, I can't speak for everybody. Not everybody adds incredible amounts of value to what maybe they get compensated.
Sure.
But just like you, my main goal is I'm trying to add the maximum of value I can possibly have in order to benefit them and their families and then the communities they're a part of. So, yeah, I mean, it's always maximize value in so many different areas: planning, wealth accumulation, growth, distribution, preservation, all these things that will create a financial plan that not only starts at one point in time, but also changes and grows over time as well.
Yeah, and two comments and then a question for you. So each person is a company. Each person has their own 3 financial statements, right? And so What I'm doing for the doctors is helping increase their income statement, right? I'm helping them increase the value of their practices, which is going to flow more money into their pocket, their revenue. Dr. A, his revenue, or her revenue. What you're doing is helping to optimize their balance sheet, right? Like you're increasing their assets so relative to their liabilities, and that creates equity value for them.
Correct.
And so like I think, as I think about living in LA, inflating my lifestyle, like it's fun, right? But at the same time, I need to play proportionally better offense. I need to increase my own personal margins, my own EBITDA margins, and my own cash flow margins as well. But then the second comment I had was, how do you think about investing in a world, like you've heard my thesis on AI, you have your own thesis that you're developing on AI internally. But how do you think about investing in a world and the advice that you render to your clients in a world that's dominated by AI like this? Like my view is get exposure to companies that are at the forefront of AI. So own equity. And for me, that's my own private business equity. But for individuals that aren't doing that, it's owning NVIDIA, owning the Microsoft and Google and Facebook and the companies that are going to be at the forefront of this revolution, because they're going to multiply their market cap over the next 5 years, and it's good to kind of own a piece of that company. I also have a view of like crypto, and we should talk about that. We should get your cryptographer friend on here so we could have that debate. But my view is that we're in a debt crisis in the United States. It took us 200 years to add $1 trillion of debt, and now we're doing it every 100 days. We're in the middle of a debt crisis right now. That's the reality of it, and I don't think the Democrats are helping that. But what does that mean? It means like at the same time, there's less appetite from China, there's less appetite from the Japanese to buy US treasuries, and so who's gonna buy those US treasuries? Because we're gonna have to keep issuing them, our expenses keep going up, our revenue's going down as a country. If we were a company, or if we were a person, we would be bankrupt. But why are we not bankrupt? Because the United States reserve currency status and our ability to arbitrarily print fucking money with the centralized cabal of academics that we call the Federal Reserve, right? And Jerome Powell sits on top of that. Not to say those people are, incompetent, but I think it's central planning, right? And I think like a more market-based approach would probably, be more advisable. That's a whole other conversation. But the Treasury is going to the Treasury is going to be issuing these bonds, which allows the government to have more inflow of money. Who's going to buy that? It's going to be the Federal Reserve with printed money. What does that mean? It creates inflation. What is inflation? It's like when you have increased supply of money and not as much increase in goods and services. So the average cost of a goods and service costs more. We saw that with COVID. That's going to continue. So we want to buy, my view is like you want to buy inflation hedge assets. You could buy TIPS, Treasury inflation protected securities, or you could buy things like Bitcoin, where there's a verifiable scarce supply of them, 21, 22 million, whatever it is. For a fact that in 21, 24, there's still going to be 22 million Bitcoin. I guarantee you there's going to be a lot more US dollars in circulation, even if it's still, a role within our society. I think crypto is kind of the next step in the monetary paradigm globally. That's a whole other debate, but AI equity, inflation hedge assets, and maybe something at the intersection of that. That's what I'm focusing on. I think this has been a productive conversation. We could obviously dive deep on any of these individual topics, and I think it would be good to do that. Because right now I'm just like regurgitating what I know, and you're regurgitating what you know. We should have other people on this podcast that are domain experts on specific topics that we discussed on, because I want to be challenged, right? You want to be challenged. Like I want to expand my knowledge. I want to be proven wrong, because that leads to the evolution of my knowledge and evolution of self. And so we're going to have those people on. We're going to be challenged, and we're going to be all the better for it. And hopefully, our listeners are as well. But just to round it out, we are in an AI revolution. This is a cognitive revolution. The cost of intelligence is going to go down. There's going to be job dislocations. I challenge people that are listening to this to start a side business. I just decided to leave my job in private equity. I had a little bit of a safety net. I had saved up money very rigorously from investment banking and private equity. So I was in a privileged position to start this business and kind of just jump ship right away. But for those that don't have that risk tolerance, that's completely reasonable. But like you have to read the writing on the wall. This is happening now. And you're not the exception. Like, you might be a private equity VP, and guess what? Like, you might get axed in 2 years because you have an AI private equity VP and your partner doesn't care about you. Like, this is raw capitalism, right? Like, let's just be honest about it. And so what is one to do? Start a business that's AI enabled, get creative with it, start a faceless YouTube channel, start a productized service business. Like, find something that you are uniquely specialized in and deliver that, even if it's at a small scale. And then, you know, it's one of those things where your side business becomes your main business, and like, you are embracing the changes that are coming, whether you like it or not. And so, like, that's what I would kind of challenge our listeners to do.
Yeah, definitely. I agree, right? It's putting yourself in a position to have that freedom moving forward and to not be dependent, right? And I think that's the biggest thing now is
That's
we move.
sovereignty.
That's sovereignty, right?
Yes.
And you know, like, my thing is, you know, I don't want to have to depend on anybody for anything, right? I think that's like the biggest thing is having that true sovereignty on your own and something that you built, right? Because that's what really feels good at the end of the day. And that's the journey, is like you building that to create that thing that will give you that freedom.
Yeah, and at the risk of sounding toxically masculine, I think if you're a male and you're deriving your paycheck from someone else, I think that's pretty beta.
Yeah.
That's a polarizing statement.
Yeah, polarizing, very polarizing statement. So,
eat what you kill, man.
yeah, exactly. You eat
Like,
what you kill.
You know, rewind to the hunter and gatherer days. Like, you
100%.
think I was telling you, hey, go hunt that buffalo, and I want a piece of it when you get back?
Nope, we were all going to hunt the buffalo.
Yeah, let's hunt some buffalo. Man.
And some of us were dying out there hunting the buffalo,
Yeah.
right? It's like, yeah, 8 of us are going to go out, maybe 6 of us are going to come back, but that was for the greater good of the tribe.
Yeah, and
right?
guess what? Those 6 get to procreate, and that's evolution.
Evolution at its finest. So, anyway,
On that note,
more for next time. Guys, thanks for listening. This is super fun for Rob and I, and we're just trying to deliver as much value on a variety of different subject matter, and we're going to have some guests coming on soon, which is super exciting for us and hopefully for you. And with that, we'll see you next time.
have a good one, guys.